Good evening to everybody, and welcome to our regular weekly Monday evening class. And it's a joy to be with you. Today, I'd like to speak on a topic that came to mind a few weeks ago. I was speaking to a different audience than this, and I was speaking about the teachings of Paramhansa Yogananda, as I always do. And I used a couple of terms as I was speaking. I was speaking about the change in consciousness and something that it was a new way of thinking. And I used a term that was a very Dwapara way of approaching the subject. And I used that term Dwapara Yuga, but I used it in the sense not as a yuga, but as a way of thinking, as a way of behaving, a new age type of approach to life. And almost as I was saying those words, and immediately thereafter, and after the class was over, I realized that the audience I was speaking to at that time may not have actually understood the words that I was using. What is this fellow talking about? Dwapara Yuga, Dwapara way of thinking. And I realized I sometimes do that. I use words that are out of context that the audience may not understand. And so I kind of slapped myself a little bit because I didn't really have time in the context of that talk to explain what it was that what that word meant. And I noticed that in the explanation of Yogananda's teachings, other acharyas, teachers, will also sometimes use that term. And I thought it would be a good idea for me to back up a little bit and talk a little bit about that terminology and Dwapara Yuga. But I don't want to, because I think I'm speaking to an audience here that does understand a little bit about what I'm referring to when I use those words. I don't want to give an exposition of Sri Shikhteshwar's theory of the yugas. That's not my intention. It's more the focus upon what is Dwapara Yuga about and what is the consciousness that is associated with Dwapara Yuga when we use that term in conversation or in description of something that is futuristic or a quality of this age that we find ourselves in. And I'd like to explore that topic a little bit. But for those of you who want to, on your own, explore the yugas according to Swami Kriyananda, I would recommend one book you need to have as a spiritual aspirant if you're a disciple of Paramhansa Yogananda on your shelf is his book, The Holy Science. I don't know if you can read that, it's sort of backwards on the screen, but it's The Holy Science by Swami Shikhteshwar, and this can be obtained through any good metaphysical bookstore, YSS. I'm not sure if Ananda Sangha sells that book or not, but usually you'll see the book with Swami Shikhteshwar's photograph on it. There's also another interesting book that was published some years later. I don't have a copy of it here to show you, but it also in metaphysical bookstores you might be able to find it. It was by a couple of authors, Joseph Selby and David Steinmetz, who happen to be devotees of Paramhansa Yogananda, Ananda Sangha members. They wrote a book called The Yugas, and they explore, I think it's a little, I'm not all that in tune with all the things that they say in that book, but it's an interesting book. They do give a lot of interesting perspectives on this Yuga theory and perhaps what the implications of it are. So those are two things that are of reference. But just to begin, to give a little groundwork, Swami Kriyananda explained and proposed that we are entering into a new age right now. And the ancient theory of the yugas is understood by those who astrological knowledge of Indian Vedic astrology, that the world goes through cycles of expansion and contraction of consciousness, or as Swami Shikhteshwar explains it, an increase in man's ability to understand, be aware expands and contracts in regular cycles. And these cycles have been described by astrologers in India as being very, very long. I mean, we're in an age now, according to them, of Kali Yuga, which is going to last hundreds of thousands of years. And then but following Kali Yuga, which is termed a dark age, is a more higher age known as Dwapara Yuga, Dwapara second, the second Yuga, Kali being the dark age, second age, followed by Treta Yuga and Satya Yuga. And these four ages then rise in consciousness and awareness, man's intellect increases, outwardly things, and you become more sattvic, and then it goes into a decrease in reverse order, Satya Yuga, Treta Yuga, Dwapara Yuga, and Kali Yuga, and so forth. It repeats, cycle over and over and over again. And Swami Shikhteshwar said that this Yuga cycle is true, but the ancient astrologers had misread the signs, the zodiac, and their astronomy was off. And basically the cycles are not as long. Or if they are as long, they're within those cycles, there are mini cycles of a shorter duration of 24,000 years, which is basically corresponds with the precession of the equinoxes. And of course, you could find this explained a little bit more in detail in the introduction to Swami Shikhteshwar's book. But according to him, he said, we have come commonly opposed to what common thinking in India astrologically says, that we are in Kali Yuga. We are not, that we have exited Kali Yuga and we are now in the beginning stages of that second Yuga, which is Dwapara Yuga. And that according to the shorter cycles, as explained by Swami Shikhteshwar, Dwapara Yuga was ascending Dwapara Yuga was 1,000 years, but with a transitional period of 100 years prior and after, so 1,200 years totally, that was at its darkest point in approximately the year 1500. No, 500 AD. And since that time, we were in ascending Kali Yuga up until 1700, 500 plus 1,200. Now, I think he actually says 499, but I'm going to round it off here. Do a 500 to 1700 and 1699. And so at 1700, we then entered into a transitional period of, because each yuga has a transitional period, but Dwapara's transitional period, these sandhis, these transitional periods of 200 years. So this transitional period into Dwapara, and that we formally entered into Dwapara proper in the year 1900 or thereabouts. And again, now we're into Dwapara Yuga, but Dwapara Yuga, according to Swami Shikhteshwar, will last for 2,400 years. And so here we are, or 22,000 years plus the 200 transitional sandhis after and before. Now, here we are at the very beginning. So 2,400 years is a long time. And even if these are approximate numbers, that's still going to be a long time. So we're right at the very beginning. But yet the prospect of moving into a higher age is intriguing. And I think it's also hope-inducing in the sense that, yes, we look back on the age from, Christ's time, Buddha's time. We look at that was a dark age. If we look at what happened in those times, man's understanding was low. And Swami Shikhteshwar said one of the qualities, you could say that the qualities define the age that we're in. And if you were to look at the qualities of that dark age, you will see that, as Swami Shikhteshwar mentioned it, in the Kali Yuga, it's characterized by mankind's inability to, or mankind's tendency to see this material reality as the only reality, the only existence, the only substance of this world is material, and nothing beyond that is possible, or we not even considered. And so we've come out of this age of darkness, and darkness in the sense of ignorance, lack of knowledge, lack of ability to see. And we've come out of that. And if we look at the time from certainly 500 AD was a very dark time. It's even, I think modern historians even speak of it as a dark age. We don't even have records of a lot of things then. Writing was not even known to many people at that time. And so consequently, we can see that, yes, the world has been transformed since those times, and that we see in the world at about year 1700, national or internationally, we see the onset of a different age taking place. World exploration was beginning to happen. The knowledge base of this was beginning to increase. We began to see that perhaps at that time, and this is an international time of expansion of science, began Galileo, scientific method. Now, these were ancient things from ancient times that were known, but they had been lost. Certainly you look in India and you could see that time from the invasions that took place, the kingdoms that were destroyed, the libraries that were destroyed during the Dark Ages. But there was a flowering that began to take place. And of course, from the European point of view, there was a time of expansion, and that expansion, of course, moved into India as another invasion of the Western European powers into India. But yet, if we look at it from a worldwide perspective, we see that instead of a local understanding, now it was a global understanding. The world began to shrink in a sense. Communications began to develop, and with science and with the 18th and 19th century, we began to see this development of science. We began to see a development of the Industrial Revolution, and great changes began to take place. And in the midst of that darkness, there was an awakening that also began to take place. And this, we had begun at that time, 1700, entered into that Sunday, that transitional period between that dark age and the next stage that was going to follow, which is Dwapara Yuga. And so consequently, when we use these terms, a very Dwapara Yuga way of approaching it, it's referring to those qualities of that age that we have now entered into according to Swami Shikhteshwar. And so what are those qualities of this new age? What does it mean about Dwapara Yuga? And again, I say, if you want to know the mechanics of the yugas, what the timelines and things like that, I do refer you to the introduction of his Holy Science, or that other book called The Yugas by those other authors. They go into it much more deeply than I can in the limited time that I have. But Swami Shikhteshwar's book is very cryptic. He didn't explain a lot. And you'll see, if you do choose to read the whole book of the Holy Science, it's quite a deep book. It's a scripture in its own right. And he pretty much describes or explains the nature of this universe and how we as individual souls have found ourselves embodied here, and what the procedure is for us to be able to liberate ourselves, find ourselves liberated into our divine goal, reach our highest potential. But Dwapara Yuga, we find ourselves at that very critical time at the beginning of a new age, an age that's different, but yet society itself is entering this age. But yet we carry with us the mindset societally, and of course, we're influenced by that society. We carry the mindset of a darker age with us, because the qualities of Kali Yuga, we're one of that mindset which sees this substance, this physical matter as the only reality. And is that not the way science still continues to look at this world, at this creation? Scientific materialism would be another way to explain that. The scientific, in other words, explaining things in terms of the mechanics of matter. Whereas the quality, and perhaps the defining quality of the coming age of Dwapara, is energy. But we see at the very beginning of the 20th century, coincidentally, or maybe not so coincidentally, because we had entered into this new age, Einstein's very famous formula of E equals mc squared was proposed at that time as an explanation that yes, matter has its reality in this context of this creation, but matter at its essence is energy. And energy is, you could say there's an equivalency there, convertibility. Matter and energy are equal, neither can be created nor destroyed. Principle of physics. So we began to see that change even in the physical sciences, but yet, according to the scientists, of course, matter is the real reality that we're dealing with, and energy happens to be a manifestation at that. But as we move into the ages to come, we'll see that energy, especially in Dwapara Yuga, that is the substance that is going to be more definitive. And we begin to see our lives in terms of energy. And that has consequences. It's a worldview, you might say, but yet we're carrying with us the old worldview. And so consequently, that matters is substance, it's very physical. We see things in terms of physical realities. You could sort of say a solidity, and that expresses itself in terms of organization, of foundational principles, of very solid ways of looking at life. And it, you could say, even in the realm of government and power, it's based upon property. It's based upon physical realities, and organizations are structure. So you see religion has its structure of organizational world organizations, the Catholic Church, organizational entities. All of these things are reflective of a very Kali Yuga way of thinking, because they're immovable in some ways. And so you find that we still think in those terms when we look toward the future. We can't help it, we're influenced by it. But as time goes by, we'll begin to start thinking in new ways. Whereas you might say, even if you related this to the chakras, the base chakra, the Muladhara chakra is very fixed realities, Saturnian, you might say. They're very, and fixity, rigidity, and solidity, which makes a good base, good foundation. But then if you moved up the chakras of the second chakra, the Swadhisthana, you see there's fluidity, water. It's a water element, earth element at the base, water element, which is flowing. And of course, that has its positive and negative sides to it, and if it's as it's expressed. And so too, you could say Kali Yuga has this, a solid base foundation, but that's limiting. And as we're moving into a new age, we're beginning to think in terms of energy. Now, this happens naturally. We move, and Shikhteshwar explains how we move into a new age, higher understanding, because the world, the solar system as a whole, our Earth and its, brother and sister planets, and the sun move in the galaxy closer and further away from the galactic center, and which is at the base of why we have these yugas in the first place. when we're closer to the galactic center, revolving around a dual star, the sun's dual, that we are bathed in greater rays, you could say, from that galactic center, which enlivens and enlightens man's consciousness. Man's intellect is able, as it moves closer to that galactic center, to understand. And as it moves away, it's less capable of being able to understand. And so the implication is here that the capacity for mankind, society to understand is increased naturally, without necessarily trying, you might say. Or you could look at it another way. As we move closer and further away from the galactic center, those souls that are in tune with that higher state of consciousness, a greater intellectual ability, will be incarnated during those higher states. I mention that because many people think, well, if we're going to, taking as a given that we reincarnate, incarnation to incarnation, we take it as a given that, oh, this is good. As we move into higher age, I'll incarnate in the higher age and be better understand, better spiritually developed as I incarnate one lifetime to the next as in the ages to come. Yes and no, because as Yogananda ji explained, there are many places to go in this universe when we reincarnate. This solar system that we live in is only one of millions, billions, who knows? And so each one of them being on a certain level of consciousness. So we go to those places that are in tune with our own level of consciousness. So if we're spiritually minded, we tend to find ourselves in solar systems that resonate with our level of consciousness, and that we don't always come back again and again to the same earth world that we find ourselves here. In fact, Master even said that after a time, we will find ourselves in some other planetary system, incarnating there. He says, because if you come back to the same place again and again and again, he said, it becomes familiar and we might figure it out too quickly, according to our karma. I don't know how literally he meant that, but nevertheless, it gives us pause to think that, yes, we're here, we're in tune with the consciousness in which we find ourselves, and that consciousness right now is the Dwapara consciousness, an onset that we're thinking in terms of this world, in terms of energy. And if we look at the development of history over the last couple of years, that's been one of the dominating principles over the last couple of centuries of scientific advancement, the discovery that there are subtle energies. And this is Shikhteshwar said, in Dwapara Yuga, mankind will discover subtle energies and their attributes and be able to use them. And one of those first ones, those subtle energies, came into being in the 18th, 19th, and in the 20th century, the discovery of electricity. That before, a couple of centuries ago, was completely unknown. People saw effects of it in lightning, maybe static electricity, but only a couple of centuries ago, mankind began to harness that, began to say, what if I could capture that lightning in a bottle, you might say, or static electricity in a bottle? Well, that bottle would be a battery, wouldn't it? To be able to collect that, be able to, a one time of event of an electrical impulse of electricity, what if I was be able to harness it? And they created a current of electricity. And from that current of electricity, how to capture it and store it. And they developed, batteries began to be developed, very primitive. You could go on to, actually, there's a number of very interesting historical scientific documentaries on the discovery of electricity on the internet. Go to YouTube, you can find them, of how people came to harness this. And then you harness it, then you found you could do work with it. You could do something with it. And then people began to think, what's the principles of it? What's the science behind of it? And it's mathematical to some degree. And you begin to harness it and use it. And now we have, look about you, where you are right now. Actually, this computer I'm talking to you through, it's all electrical on one level. Well, that's just the tip of the iceberg, is what Shikhteshwar intimated. It's that there are subtle electricities, in plural, that mankind will become to understand in this Dwapara Yuga, and their attributes, and to be able to harness them, to be able to use them. And as we do that, of course, our outward scientific knowledge increases, our impact, usability increases. But what's happening here is our ability to even conceive and work with those is, we're able to do that because our ability to expand our consciousness, our awareness, our intellectual understanding, our brain power, if you will, even, is being expanded through the influence of moving into this higher age, which we're looking at this age here of a couple thousand years. Imagine what has happened, or look back what has happened in the last 200-300 years, and project that 2,000-3,000 years into the future. What is going to happen? We can't perhaps even conceive of it right now. And that's just the beginning, because we move from Dwapara into Treta Yuga, into Satya Yuga beyond that. So I find it very exciting and stimulating. But we have to also understand, if we can look at these things as a positive thing, energy, an awareness of it, it's a positive potential, but it doesn't, we have to understand, also mean that if you have energy, that we're going to use that energy wisely. There's a very fun cartoon movie that Walt Disney did many years ago called The Wizard's Apprentice. It was, I'm not sure what it was called, but it was about the Wizard's Apprentice, and his character, Mickey Mouse, is the apprentice to a wizard, and the wizard goes away, and the wizard's apprentice uses the wand and stirs up all sorts of wizardry trouble when the wizard has gone away. And so consequently, we're like that. We're, you might say, the apprentice. We have access to energy, but that does not guarantee that energy will be used wisely. But yet, it gives us the potential. And so consequently, mankind, society has been, a door has been opened for us to be able to increase that, our steps in fulfilling a potential. And it's up to us to use it wisely. But also a hopeful aspect of this is that spiritually, our understanding of our own true nature of who and what we are as children of God, this too is awakened within Dwapara Yuga. And so consequently, this, what I want to speak about in this class, and as you could see, time passing, in future class, and maybe one after that if I don't finish, is the impact of this and what the potential might be for us going forward, and so that we make wise choices if we understand the map, the roadmap that we are following. And it's of course, there's only a few of us, but everything, ideas begin, movements begin, ideas begin to spread from a few people, and a few people making this knowledge. As we move into Dwapara Yuga, it becomes commonplace. So I say to, years ago, if I'd have said, oh, we're moving into Dwapara consciousness, nobody would have understood that. But now I say that, and you understand that. And I predict that in the age to come, century to come, this century we're finding ourselves in, this will become common terminology, common understanding. I have noticed I don't know about you if this has been your observation, but you could see I've lived a few decades and probably more decades than many of you. I've noticed something. I look at young people coming up now, and I say, I think these people are smarter than I was when I was a kid. Now I don't know if that's true or not, but it's my perception that young people seem to be bright. Not all, of course. This is a very, that's a generalization. But I think young people coming up now, they just understand certain things. Now, of course, we could say, an old guy like me, I'm having a hard time with my mobile phone trying to get the apps to work. And what do I do if I'm having trouble? I give it to a young person, say, hey, how does this thing work? And, fix this for me. And like that, because they just think in those terms. Now, is it just a matter of greater knowledge? Yes, of course, they do have the knowledge, but somehow it's in sync with their consciousness. They think in terms of that. And this is, you can see, begins to flow. In terms of technology, there's a greater attunement with it, but technology is not divorced from what's going on inside of ourselves as well. This movement of life force, movement of energy flow, we become attuned to it. And if we attune ourselves to energy rather than to matter, our ability to understand what is going on spiritually within ourselves also begins to increase, because we are entering into an age of energy. But in doing that, we're also entering into an age of energy awareness, which is at the foundation of what yoga is about. And it is because of this that our masters incarnated at this time. They come appropriate to the times and what is needed in the times. And this is the tradition of the Bhagavad Gita. When there's a need, the masters, the great ones, the avatars incarnate. God incarnates. God, you could say, descends into the consciousness of the great souls who have guided the spiritual unfoldment of this planet. And so it says in the autobiography of Yogi that the great ones, Babaji is guiding the unfoldment of spiritual unfoldment of this planet in this age. And so they incarnated at this time. It said that Christ, of course, had appeared to Babaji and asked him to send something into the world to help awaken the West, and so that East and West would be able to join hands together to carry us forward into the new age. And so Babaji, through our masters, have introduced into the world Kriya Yoga, which is based upon the principle of energy. Energy moving inside. You could say it's the Industrial Revolution was the use of energy outside. Here we have a spiritual revolution taking place inside through the introduction of these techniques of yoga, Kriya Yoga, not just this path, but just generally you're seeing yoga in the large sense is awakening the world. I do classes online with people around the world, and you see this taking place. I do classes with people on Fridays often. I do them in the evening with people in China. And you see China's not outwardly open to such things, because it's a Kali Yuga, sense of matter. Materialism is the basis of reality, but the people are awakening. And so it is around the world. They're awakening to energy. And here we are doing much of our work because of COVID-19 through the medium of energy, through the medium of communications, which has made the world smaller, which is in direct fulfillment of what Shikhteshwar said and how Paramhansa Yogananda explained it. Space would be annihilated in the age of Dwapara Yuga. Now, he didn't mean that space, literally space, the ether, we're going to annihilate the universe. He said the concept of distance. We would not be separated as we were in Kali Yuga, that, oh, if I want to send a letter from India to England, how long would that take 100 years ago? Weeks? How long did it take the boat to get there? Then airplanes, oh, much quicker. Then telegraph and telephones, communication. Now, email. You're there. I mean, a nanosecond after I say something, you understand it. And so space has compressed, and the concept of space is being annihilated. What's going to be in the future? Holograms, holography of the appearance, projection in your living room. That would be interesting. Think about it though, it's coming. And this is the age where that sort of thing will happen. But we also must realizing we have to also imbue that with spirituality. And so those things can be used properly, because Dwapara Yuga is an age of energy, but it's not necessarily an age of wisdom. It's also an age that is characterized by ego. And ego can be a tool to help us to raise ourselves energetically towards self-realization. But ego can also be a tool for destruction. It can be used wisely or badly. With ego comes one of the characteristic traits of Dwapara Yuga, self-interest. Because ego wants to, I want to improve myself. And we begin to awaken into that. And that's where I'm going to begin our discussion next week. As I told you, I wouldn't be able to finish this in one chapter, but I'm going to open it up next. I'm going to explain next week. Now, this first week, I'm just giving an introduction, and but next week I'd like to go in and be able to start with this idea of ego, self-interest, ego, or Dwapara Yuga being an age of self-interest. And then from that, and then show some historical perspective of the difference between Kali Yuga and Dwapara Yuga, to show you how Dwapara Yuga is expressing itself in a very dynamic way. We're fully into it now, but and I remind you, we're fully into it only at the very beginning. And it's exciting to think what is possible, but it's also, I want to be cautionary. We're given a tool, energy is a tool, and it's up to us to use it wisely. And it's up to us to show leadership in our little selves, leadership to our neighbors and our family, and as individuals in society, to set a standard and use energy wisely and promote that. Now, of course, there are larger forces at play, but so larger forces are going to play themselves out, but yet how they play themselves out is going to be up to us. And so we need to act, and I say this as the devotee here, we need to act as disciples of the great ones who came to guide us into the age we're entering into. And I repeat what Swami Kriyananda would often say. He said it was his opinion and firm belief that in the ages ahead, when people look back on this time that we are in now, this Dwapara Yuga, our guru, the guru of my guru, many of your guru probably too, Paramhansa Yogananda, will be looked upon as the guru of this age of Dwapara, because it's he that has been the instrument say, the instrument of Divine Mother, the instrument of God, the instrument of Babaji, to be the one to introduce these concepts into the world. Didn't create these concepts, these are universal principles, but through him, he at the very beginning has brought into the world these techniques and this consciousness and this ways of living, and shown how we can practically apply these into our daily life. He has been the instrument, divinely, you might say, given that task. But it's, of course, our duty as disciples to carry that forward into the world today. And so next